From time to time, Hollywood's archives reveal stories that feel less like production trouble and more like encounters with something pressing against the edge of the frame. Across decades of filmmaking, there have been moments when cameras behaved as if they were aware, when microphones captured sounds that no one present remembered hearing, and when strips of film carried distortions that matched no known mechanical cause. These weren't casual malfunctions or the usual chaos of a film set. They were disturbances that appeared with uncanny precision, surfacing at the exact beats where the narrative brushed against danger, mystery, or contact with forces beyond human understanding. Technicians who spent their lives mastering analog machinery admitted they had never seen similar patterns. Shots that should have been straightforward would fracture with streaks of light, unexpected pulses, or subtle ruptures in exposure. Perfectly stable sets became unpredictable the moment a scene required characters to confront something unknown. In some cases, footage developed signatures, ghostly overlays, sudden bursts of grain, or vanishing fragments, as if the film stock itself had reacted emotionally to what it recorded. Sound engineers fared no better. Microphones picked up tones that resembled signals rather than noise, low hums that rose and fell as though responding to dialogue, or faint modulations that vanished whenever equipment was tested. Playback devices contradicted each other. A whisper present on magnetic tape might disappear on digital transfer, only to return when the reel was rethreaded. This episode gathers 15 of the most compelling incidents buried in production history, moments when sci-fi films, old and iconic, were shaped by forces no one on set could name. Whether the explanations lie in unstable wiring, stray electromagnetic fields, or something that treated the equipment like a channel, the evidence remains. The interference was real, targeted, and still recorded in the surviving reel. Step inside the vault. Let the tape roll. Watch the static carefully because sometimes it tries to speak back. In Star Wars: A New Hope, 1977. Long before Star Wars reshaped cinema, its production endured a string of malfunctions that defied the grounded nature of the shoot. In the Tunisian desert, film magazines inexplicably jammed during scenes referencing the Force or unseen power. The jams were brief, specific, and unreproducible during testing. Crew members shrugged them off as sand-related, though the pattern suggested otherwise. Interior sets brought their own riddles. On the Death Star corridors, rows of practical lights dimmed in a descending sweep whenever Vader entered a scene, an effect that no electrician could attribute to any circuit issue. The dimming occurred only during takes, never during rehearsal or setup. On developed film, the light fall-off looked intentional, as if the environment acknowledged the character's presence. Post-production offered new puzzles. The optical printer responsible for lightsaber composites sometimes produced unexpected halos rings of light that didn't correspond to programmed settings. When the same frames were reprinted, the anomalies vanished without explanation. Sound engineers documented a recurring tremor beneath cockpit dialogue in the Millennium Falcon. The vibration carried a harmonic quality that rose and fell like distant machinery. Attempts to isolate the frequency erased it entirely until the footage returned to its original reel, where the tremor re-emerged precisely at lines invoking the Force. Lucas kept his public comments technical, but internal notes describe a belief that some interference felt responsive. Today, the preserved reels still carry those subtle distortions, minute shifts that appear at moments where the story gestures toward a power older than the galaxy itself. 2. Predator, 1987. The jungle landscapes of Predator posed enormous logistical challenges, but the strangest difficulties were the ones the crew couldn't attribute to environment or equipment. The infrared cameras used to capture the creature's iconic heat vision often malfunctioned when aimed at scenes implying its invisible presence. Readouts drifted unpredictably, generating false thermal signatures or shimmering contours that didn't match any form in the environment. Once the narrative shifted away from the creature's perspective, the devices snapped back into perfect calibration. Steadicam operators described moments in which their rigs resisted movement, as if held momentarily in place by a force not connected to physical terrain. When reviewing the footage, barely perceptible warps appeared, subtle bends in the frame where the jungle seemed to curve inward before settling again. These distortions didn't match lens behavior, environmental heat, or equipment faults. Audio engineers faced their own perplexities. Scenes involving the creature's mimicry captured stray snippets of dialogue from earlier takes, not echoes, but coherent fragments, displaced in time. The phenomenon baffled professionals who had worked on countless outdoor films. They had never encountered anything resembling a temporal imprint. Environmental silence presented another oddity. Several shots recorded sudden drops in ambient noise, leaving an unnaturally empty soundscape that coincided with the characters sensing a watcher in the trees. These pockets of silence appeared randomly, yet always aligned with the creature's unseen presence. To the crew, the anomalies felt like an extension of the film's premise, a hunter bending perception itself. The final footage seems to hold faint traces of that distortion moments, where the camera captured a world subtly rearranged by something just beyond human detection. 3. Blade Runner 1982. The production of Blade Runner unfolded inside a world of rain-soaked neon, but beneath the visual density lurked a sequence of disturbances that felt uncannily attuned to the film's obsessions. During scenes centered on the Voigtkampf test or conversations probing what separates humans from artificial beings, the video assist monitors developed faint afterimages, silhouettes that lagged behind the actors by a fraction of a second. These phantoms never appeared on the film negative, only on the live feed, as if the monitor temporarily held onto reflections of something not present in the room. Sound crews reported tonal fluctuations during rooftop shots, thin, high-frequency threads that drifted across the dialogue like electrical tension. When slowed during analysis, the tones formed ascending patterns too deliberate to be dismissed as interference, too faint to originate from set equipment. They emerged only during scenes contemplating memory, identity, or the boundary between real and engineered life. Even lighting equipment behaved strangely. Inside the Bradbury building, exposure readings shifted for no apparent reason, dipping slightly when characters discussed the nature of replicants or confronted moral fractures. Electricians confirmed stable power, and the shifts vanished whenever filming moved to scenes focused solely on human drama. Reviewing the raw material years later, archivists noted that the anomalies clustered around moments where the film blurred the line between human and mimic. The distortions don't feel accidental. They seem to echo the film's central tension, suggesting that the machinery, for a moment, may have glimpsed more than intended. 4. The Terminator 1984. The world of The Terminator was built on low-budget grit, yet the technical disturbances that emerged during production felt strangely aligned with its futuristic dread. During night shoots, city streetlights dimmed or fluttered in cascading waves whenever the Terminator entered frame. Los Angeles power crews confirmed no grid irregularities. The flickers occurred only when cameras were rolling, as though the environment itself acknowledged the character's arrival. The cameras behaved no less mysteriously. In several action sequences, Panavision units abruptly increased their recording speed, producing unintentional slow motion on playback. Operators insisted they had not adjusted settings. Diagnostics performed immediately after each malfunction showed flawless mechanics. The acceleration surfaced exclusively in moments, showcasing the Terminator's unstoppable momentum. Audio tracks revealed an uncanny layer of metallic resonance. Recordings captured faint servo clicks and mechanical whirs in outdoor locations devoid of machinery. These sounds appeared only between dialogue lines, forming a pattern that resembled something listening, waiting for silence before emerging. A particularly strange incident occurred during the tech noir nightclub sequence. Frames from one camera became streaked with horizontal lines, artifacts reminiscent of videotape tracking errors. Yet no video equipment was involved. The scene was shot entirely on film. The distortions appeared seconds before the Terminator stepped into the frame, then vanished instantly. Cameron dismissed the anomalies with a grin, calling them glitches from the future, but the crew notes paint a different picture. Malfunctions occurred with narrative precision, surfacing at moments when the story's concept and intelligence from another time asserted itself. In retrospect, the interference feels almost thematic, as if the film had briefly aligned with the world it imagined. 5. Alien 1979. The production of Alien unfolded inside dim metal corridors and confined air ducts, and those spaces seemed to induce distortions in the very tools meant to capture them. The Nostromo screens and monitors, powered by independent circuits, began spewing strings of random alphanumeric symbols during scenes tied to the creature's emergence. These weren't glitches caused by interference, they were sequences, repeating themselves in patterns no technician could decrypt. When shooting shifted to more grounded dialogue, the monitors calmed, as if whatever caused the disruption withdrew. The ship's ventilation tunnels became a site of recurring sensor failure. Heat and airflow detectors flickered with warnings of temperature spikes that didn't exist. Attempts to replicate the readings during diagnostic sessions produced nothing, The anomalies manifested only when the xenomorph's unseen presence became thematically central. Visual distortions troubled several shots. When the creature moved in darkness, the camera feed produced subtle ripples, barely visible waves passing through the frame. They resembled neither lens flaws nor operator shake. Lab technicians, after scrutinizing the negatives, found no emulsion damage, only the strange shimmering that seemed to follow the creature like a shadow from another dimension. The audio track compounded the unease. During Dallas's air duct sequence, the boom mic recorded a low, guttural vibration that didn't match any prop, speaker, or physical element in the set. The sound carried no directional qualities and vanished when retaking the scene under different blocking. Ridley Scott joked that the film was haunted by its own monster, but the pattern was undeniable. The interference mirrored the alien itself, unpredictable, hidden, and impossible to fully trace. The footage remains a record not only of a creature stalking a crew, but of something in the machinery seemingly responding to its presence. 6. The Thing, 1982. The chilled isolation of The Thing seeped into the production in ways the crew could never quite rationalize. The outpost set, kept at low temperatures to mimic Antarctic conditions, disrupted equipment with unnerving consistency. Cameras jammed despite operating well above their freezing thresholds, and light meters flickered as though responding to invisible fluctuations in the air. These disruptions clustered around sequences depicting imitation and exposure, as if the environment bristled each time the narrative touched the creature's true nature. The most baffling pattern emerged during the iconic blood test segment. The camera's shutter shifted out of sync by the slightest margin, producing a disorienting stutter effect that ruined the take. Repeating the setup under identical conditions yielded the same failure at the same narrative beat. When examined later, the camera showed no mechanical error. The issue seemed tied not to the device, but to the moment. Sound recordings added their own layer of dread. Beneath the dialogue, mixers detected inconsistent thumps, slow, arrhythmic, and too deliberate to be environmental. When isolated, the thumps resembled a heartbeat, but not one tied to any actor or piece of machinery. The rhythm changed depending on who stood in frame, intensifying when paranoia peaked. Crew members blamed the cold or the set's metallic resonance, but productions under similar conditions had never experienced anything comparable. Carpenter avoided speculation, though he admitted privately that the set possessed a pressure, something that resisted documentation. The final footage still carries faint traces of these anomalies, subtle distortions that feel less like technical flaws and more like the lingering presence of a shapeshifter unwilling to be revealed. 7. 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968. Although known for its technical perfection, 2001 endured an array of malfunctions that stood in stark contrast to Kubrick's obsession with control. The centrifuge, set an engineering marvel designed to rotate around its performers, regularly triggered false readings on its stabilizing sensors. Instruments registered tilt, vibration, or momentum shifts, even when the structure was fully stationary. These erratic signals appeared exclusively in scenes involving HAL's surveillance or the ship's autonomy, dissolving the instant the narrative returned to mundane operation. Visual anomalies surfaced in unexpected places. During the Dawn of Man sequences, several takes contained ghostly silhouettes, faint shapes that flickered a few frames before the actors entered. Projectionists swore the rear projection system had been perfectly aligned, yet the phantom figures appeared, then vanished, without any mechanical justification. Sound engineers found themselves unnerved by the mysterious clicks recorded around HAL's dialogue lines. The noises carried the cadence of mechanical switches, despite the absence of any such devices on set. Microphones captured them only in pre-roll and post-roll segments tied to HAL's presence, reinforcing the impression of a shadow system operating just beyond reach. Even the spaceship miniatures became subjects of confusion. Motion control tracks stalled on 2 separate occasions, both coinciding with narrative beats in which HAL's decisions tightened their grip on the crew. Diagnostics revealed no flaws. The stalls never repeated. Kubrick never commented openly on these disturbances, but crew recollections suggest a shared unease. Watching the preserved footage today, the distortions appear almost symbolic flickers of intention embedded in the material itself, as if 2001 momentarily became aware of being observed. 8. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977. The making of Close Encounters was marked by a pattern of anomalies that seemed remarkably synchronized with the film's exploration of contact between worlds. The massive lighting rigs built to mimic the radiance of extraterrestrial craft surged without warning, releasing bursts of brilliance that exceeded programmed output. Electricians found no fluctuations in the power supply. The pulses arrived unpredictably, yet unfailingly during sequences meant to depict alien presence. The camera team faced troubles just as enigmatic. Long exposure shots, intended to capture soft halos and glowing atmospheric effects, produced arcing streaks of light that curved through the frame with eerie precision. These arcs bore no resemblance to known optical artifacts. Laboratory specialists suggested the exposures behaved as though responding to a moving source of illumination, one that wasn't present. Sound recordings also defied explanation. The iconic five-tone motif occasionally picked up ghostly harmonics, so faint they seemed like whispers humming beneath the music. These harmonics formed geometric patterns on spectral analysis, too ordered to be random electrical noise. Curiously, they appeared only when the narrative referenced communication or revelation. Spielberg later joked that the equipment had its own sense of drama, but internal memos reveal a quieter acknowledgement of something stranger. Scenes grounded in everyday life, filmed without issue. Disruptions appeared only when characters crossed thresholds into the extraordinary. Looking back, the irregularities feel less like glitches and more like a faint counterpoint, an echo from something just out of reach, aligning with the film's central question: what happens when two realities overlap for a moment too long? 9. Poltergeist 1982. The disturbances during the filming of Poltergeist extended far beyond the eerie subject matter, weaving themselves directly into the production process. Motion control rigs designed to deliver perfectly timed camera and prop movements began firing commands out of sequence, as though receiving instructions from an invisible operator. Technicians examined circuits, checked fuses, traced every wire, yet every diagnostic showed flawless functionality. The misfires surfaced only during scenes centered on supernatural communication, almost as if the equipment reacted to the film's tension. The audio department encountered inexplicable layers of sound that were never present on set. Whispers, faint but structured, crept into certain recordings. When analyzed, these whispers dissolved on digital systems, but reappeared with startling clarity on analog playback. They carried no origin, no identifiable voice, and seemed to manifest only during moments when the script confronted the unseen. Even the film stock behaved unpredictably. A cluster of frames emerged dotted with tiny, luminous flecks, arranged in patterns resembling constellations. Kodak technicians ruled out dust, scratches, and chemical errors. The frames were intact except for the glittering distortions that no one could reproduce. Tobe Hooper dismissed the malfunctions publicly, yet notes from the crew admitted a shared sense of the uncanny. Lights dimmed in cold, draftless rooms, and equipment racks experienced short-lived temperature drops just before audio distortions occurred. What survived in the reels today suggests something subtle but deliberate, a kind of interference that flickered into existence only when the story touched the boundaries of the unseen. 10. The Abyss, 1989. Underwater filmmaking is notoriously difficult, yet The Abyss brought with it a brand of interference unlike anything Cameron's crew had dealt with before. Inside the massive tank built for the production, strange drifting lights appeared in the footage, soft, undulating trails that seemed to float independently of any lamp or practical source. Divers swore nothing in the environment could have produced them. The distortions moved as if alive, bending through the darkness in patterns that mimicked motion rather than reflection. Instrument readings only deepened the mystery. Pressure and depth sensors attached to underwater cameras fluctuated without cause. These weren't wild swings, but deliberate, incremental shifts that aligned suspiciously with scenes tied to the film's enigmatic aquatic intelligence. Once the narrative returned to human conflict, the sensors stabilized instantly, as if whatever influenced them had simply withdrawn. During one descent sequence, the audio recorder captured a resonant hum that pulsed upward in pitch, almost like an engine spinning in the distance. The tank held no running machinery capable of producing it, and the sound never repeated. Acoustic testing offered no answers. The hum existed only in that single moment. Several reels, stored in waterproof cases, developed subtle, wave-like patterns on the emulsion. Lab examiners compared them to water damage, yet the canisters had remained sealed, and no environmental issue could explain the uniformity of the distortion. Curiously, all affected reels contained scenes referencing communication with the unknown. Cameron pressed through every malfunction, but even he acknowledged the uncanny alignment between the narrative and the anomalies. When archivists revisit the footage today, they note the same quiet impression, that something inside the tank responded to the presence of the cameras, not with aggression, but with curiosity. 11. The Fly. 1986. The transformation at the center of The Fly seemed to extend beyond the narrative and into the machinery documenting it. The effects stage, thick with makeup, tubes, and prosthetics, developed unpredictable lighting shifts whenever Brundle's mutation reached its more grotesque stages. Lamps dimmed incrementally too smoothly to be power loss, too subtly to be coincidence, yet the changes appeared unmistakably on film. Electricians tested the circuits, replaced ballasts, and monitored the grid. Everything read stable. The only instability was what the camera witnessed. Lens behavior puzzled operators even more. Locked focus mechanisms drifted during tight shots of Brundle's deteriorating form. The focus fall-off had a strangely organic quality, not mechanical, almost as if the frame recoiled from the performance. Under identical lighting and distance tests, the anomaly refused to repeat, emerging solely during moments that confronted themes of decay and identity. Audio provided its own eerie layer. Recordings captured a low, insectoid hum with no identifiable origin. The frequency didn't match equipment vibrations, overhead fans, or ambient sound. When isolated, the hum carried a faint tonal structure, nearly musical in its repetition. It never appeared in scenes unrelated to Brundle's transformation. A damaged reel provided the final touch of unease. Instead of typical fogging or chemical streaking, the edges displayed a creeping pattern, as though something had brushed against the film from the outside. Lab technicians could only shrug. It wasn't heat, moisture, or improper handling. Cronenberg later remarked that the production's atmosphere seemed to mutate alongside its protagonist. Whatever caused the disruptions, environment, chance, or something subtler, it left the troubling impression that the film was documenting a breakdown that wasn't entirely fictional. 12. Westworld 1973. The original Westworld was celebrated for its early digital concepts, yet the production itself seemed curiously disrupted by those very ideas. Whenever the crew filmed scenes in which the androids began to malfunction, the digital vision effects captured with a pioneering electronic sensor broke down in ways that defied technical logic. Pixel clusters drifted diagonally across the frame like fragments of faulty circuitry, even though the device had passed every diagnostic test minutes earlier. What unsettled the team most was the consistency. These distortions surfaced only when the narrative involved artificial minds slipping their constraints. The audio department found themselves facing similar puzzles. During otherwise still moments, microphones picked up rhythmic vibrations, soft pulses, spaced with uncanny precision. The sound vanished during rehearsals, emerging only in takes where the androids confronted moments of failure or rebellion. Engineers searched for mechanical causes, but none matched the strange regularity of the pulses. Playback made matters even stranger. Reels from scenes featuring the gunslinger character developed slight exposure dips whenever he entered frame. The changes were too subtle to notice on set, but clearly visible in the dailies. The camera crew confirmed exposure settings had been locked, and lab examinations showed the negatives suffered no chemical flaws. The effect had simply appeared, then disappeared, without explanation. Crichton maintained a practical stance, yet even he admitted that the set seemed unusually reactive, as if the theme of machines waking up had somehow seeped into the equipment. What remained on the reels wasn't ordinary failure. It resembled interference with intent, echoing the story's central fear, that technology might one day decide to act on its own. 13. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. On the surface, the Andromeda Strain was a product of meticulous craftsmanship, but beneath that precision lay a series of glitches that defined the production's quiet unease. The film's multi-monitor system, an experimental technological feat for its time, developed patterns of synchronized flicker whenever scenes involved discussions of extraterrestrial contamination. The flicker followed no electrical pattern, forming instead a rhythmic sequence that some crew members likened to coded signaling. Attempts to document the anomaly caused it to vanish instantly, returning only during active shooting. The cleanroom set proved equally unsettled. Cameras occasionally captured translucent distortions, drifting through the sterile environment shapes without clear form, fleeting enough to dismiss until technicians noticed they appeared in duplicate reels but not in the original negative. The phenomenon defied straightforward explanation. If it was a defect, it should have impacted the original reel first, not its copies. Sound complications added tension to the atmosphere. High-frequency bursts resembling data transmissions crept into recordings during scenes that referenced mutation or unknown organism. These tones did not match any equipment on set, and their timing aligned suspiciously with moments of narrative escalation. Engineers reviewed every piece of audio gear and could find no shared fault. Director Robert Wise later hinted that the production had a strange rhythm, a sense that the film responded unpredictably whenever its fictional pathogen became the subject of conversation. To archivists studying the surviving material, the interference feels less like accident and more like a parallel thread woven into the film's structure, an echo of the story's paranoia preserved in the artifacts of its making. 14. Stalker 1979. The making of Stalker is remembered for its exhausting conditions, but the film's most baffling challenges hid in its technical anomalies. In abandoned factories and long-forgotten tunnels, the equipment often reacted as if influenced by the environment itself. Footage developed with a faint green tint, not from chemical imbalance, but from an unknown exposure irregularity that appeared solely in shots tied to the film's most enigmatic sequences. Technicians examined every step of the development process and could find no consistent cause. Focus issues plagued the production as well. Even with manual lenses locked cleanly in place, certain shots blurred in a strangely organic way, softening edges as if the camera struggled to hold on to the image. The distortion repeated at identical angles on multiple attempts, defying the logic of mechanical failure. Tarkovsky, always perceptive of atmosphere, remarked that the zone refused some images, an offhand comment that unsettled more than a few crew members. Audio presented its own suite of mysteries. During quiet scenes inside derelict structures, boom microphones registered a low drone with an unnatural regularity. The sound was absent during on-set monitoring and emerged only on tape, returning unpredictably across takes. Attempts to recreate the noise failed, leaving the crew with recordings that felt almost like distant machinery operating underground. Years later, those who inspected the remaining negatives noted patterns of interference that didn't match typical film degradation. Some describe them as echoes imprinted onto the material, faint but persistent, a reminder that filming in the zone left behind traces of something no one could fully interpret. The disturbances were as deliberate as they were inexplicable, amplifying the sensation that Stalker had recorded more than intended. 15. Solaris 1972. During the production of Solaris, the crew encountered a series of disruptions that felt unnervingly aligned with the film's themes. Scenes involving the sentient ocean, its shifting colors, its unsettling calm were consistently marked by visual disturbances the team couldn't replicate under controlled tests. Thin ripples of light appeared on the negatives like pulses, drifting across the frame before dissolving the moment the camera shifted to something mundane. The pattern was irregular yet strangely alive, as if reacting to the emotional charge of the scene. Sound engineers found themselves equally perplexed. Certain recordings carried faint oscillations, distant and soft, that bore no resemblance to ambient noise on set. The tones drifted in and out like whispers from behind a wall, impossible to pinpoint, and always present during sequences tied to memory or grief. When technicians isolated the tracks for analysis, the anomalies vanished, only to reappear when the footage returned to its reel. A particularly disquieting incident occurred when the camera's internal metering system began behaving erratically in a sealed room, shifting readings as if responding to a source of light no one could detect. Tarkovsky discouraged conversation about the event, hinting that the film had a sensitivity of its own, an intuition that responded whenever the story neared its philosophical core. Even now, archivists reviewing the preserved reels note strange density fluctuations in frames linked to the ocean imagery. Whether environmental or something more elusive, the disturbances seem to echo the narrative itself, creating a lingering impression that Solaris was more than documented, it was reflected upon by forces that didn't belong on set. Bonus: The Twilight Zone. Nightmare at 20,000 feet. 1963. Among the many unsettling tales behind early television, few productions carry an aura as peculiar as Nightmare at 20,000 feet. The episode's anxiety-filled story, centered on a passenger who witnesses something impossible outside an airplane window, seemed to stir disturbances that even veteran crew members struggled to interpret. The hydraulic aircraft set was tightly controlled, yet the cabin windows repeatedly fogged from the inside, creating hand-shaped smears that reappeared moments after being wiped clean. The phenomenon occurred exclusively during shots featuring the creature on the wing, as if the glass responded to the tension inside the scene. Lighting technicians fought a different mystery. The storm effects, built from rotating filters and coordinated strobes, produced subtle exposure pulses whenever Shatner's character locked eyes with the unseen presence outside. These pulses were too uniform to be random, and too isolated to be mechanical failure. When the footage was later analyzed frame by frame, faint bands of additional grain density emerged at the exact rhythm of the strobe, a pattern Kodak specialists admitted they couldn't reproduce in lab conditions. Audio presented the final layer of strangeness. Boom microphones, operating in an acoustically sealed stage, captured a distant rumble that resembled turbulent wind, yet only during certain takes. The low-frequency vibration would vanish when the reel was played back on one machine, then reappear when transferred to another, creating the impression that the sound was embedded somewhere between layers of magnetic tape rather than on the surface of the recording. A production memo written near the end of shooting noted a disturbing detail. The anomalies surfaced only in moments when the script required characters to witness something no one else could see. Matheson joked that perhaps the gremlin was protesting its presence on film, but archivists reviewing the negatives decades later described the same faint disturbances, barely visible tremors in exposure, subtle warps in grain. Some productions capture fiction. This one felt like it captured the residue of something waiting outside the frame. Across these productions, a single pattern emerges. None of these anomalies behaved like the accidents filmmakers learned to expect. They appeared with a kind of timing, surfacing at story beats where the films pushed into unfamiliar territory, then fading the instant the narrative stepped back. Whether these disturbances came from unstable circuits, stray electromagnetic fields, or something more elusive, moving between frames, they left behind traces that still cling to the surviving footage. So now the question passes to you. Were these events merely the quirks of aging equipment under pressure, or brief glimpses of something responding from the other side of the lens? When the machinery falters at the exact moment a story brushes against the unknown, coincidence becomes harder to accept. Which explanation feels closest to the truth? And which one do you find yourself hoping isn't real?